Podcast. We're in the Hilchis Shabbos. With right now we're doing the Siman Shin Yud Gimel 313. We're doing it right now. We're going through with Mishna Berura to give us the general layout. Following which we're gonna, God willing, we will jump into going straight with Mechaber. Meaning the Mechaber, meaning the author Yosef Cairo in the regular Shulchan Aruch, as well as the Magen Avram and the Taz on the side, and then following which we will do the Alter Rebbe on it, being that the Alter Rebbe is how we follow for the Psak in Chabad. Well, mostly how we follow. I should actually just a note about that. There is a misconception in Chabad that we exclusively follow the Alter Rebbe's rulings in Chabad. And I know people, it's an Alter Rebbe, that's it, that's what he says. So by the way, if you want to go by what's in the Alter Rebbe, then you better start getting up tonight and saying Tikkun Chatzais, the midnight prayer, which comes at 1 a.m, because the Alter Rebbe says very strongly you should do that. So, so there's what the Alter Rebbe says, and there's what the minhag is to what we're actually noyeg today. And even sometimes the actual psak din is not like the Alter Rebbe, but rather like the Tzemach Tzedek. There's other piskei din that came in the time of the Rebbe Rashab that actually reverse the psak of the Alter Rebbe. It's a misconception. Generally speaking, we follow the Alter Rebbe. That's generally speaking. But first of all, there's parts that are missing in the Alter Rebbe that we don't have today. They got lost. I think probably in when he was running around trying to escape Napoleon. In fact, wasn't that the whole thing with what he left was the shoe. They left the slipper.
Yeah, he burnt he burnt everything, and the only thing left from what he burnt up was a shoe.
Right.
That's how that story.
But I don't think he.
But I don't think he burnt the Svarim.
He burnt the Svarim. Those were in his running away and this and that, whatever. And maybe they were deposited with somebody or whatever. And anyways, over the years, whether it was at that point or later on, they got lost. So we don't even have the entirety of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. That's A. And B, there are cases, for example, generally speaking, when the Tzemach Tzedek sometimes rules not like the Alter Rebbe.
Right.
And it's interestingly the Tzemach Tzedek because first of all it was his Zayda and it was his Rebbe and the respect that he had when he's following the ruling of the Alter Rebbe. And by the way, it's not like a super common thing that he it's not like a Rabbeinu Tam Rashi thing that he's always there's various cases where he paskins differently. In the cases where he agrees to the Alter Rebbe, he quotes it that it's the Alter Rebbe. When his opinion is different, he doesn't say that the opinion that he's differing with is the Alter Rebbe, out of respect. So, anyways, but however, in our current versions of the Alter Rebbe, we're lucky enough to have notes, and those notes will tell you when there's a different psak din that we follow, or there's a different minhag, or sometimes even, like, for example, there's the halakha that the Alter Rebbe wrote in his siddur, in the Alter Rebbe siddur, which comes later, and being that it's later, you go by his later psak. Luckily, in our Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch that we have, we have very good notes that tell us about what the actual if the final psak that we follow today is different for any reason. Anywho, but right now back to Mechaber with Mishna Berura. So we're holding at number 17, Mishna Berura 17, and let me just see what is it on the Dibra Masel. The title is the Im Ein Bereishay. So before we were talking about two scenarios. We're talking about there's the scenario of a window, that the window covering, so long as you've had the intention, which means you've before Shabbos that it should be used for that. So that means it's not muktzah at this point. Meaning, if it's a T-shirt, obviously you don't have that problem really, because it's already something that's not muktzah. But let's say it was a board or something, a plywood that usually would be muktzah on Shabbos. So you have to have had the intention. However, being that when you're putting it on a window, it on a window, it doesn't look like you're doing binyan. It doesn't look like you're adding something of permanence. Being that it's a window covering is something, at least in those times, that was regularly. I mean, think about how we open and close our windows as a regular thing. Right. So right. So you have. Let's see. Yeah. So now the ein bereisha. However, if you don't have on your head, if it's sorry, that was the first thing. The second thing was, what if you have a peg? Sorry, a rod was the second thing. The second thing was a rod. So a rod, it sort of looks so you could still have in other words, once you've repaired it to look like a lock. So you've already had obviously the intention to make it into a lock, and a lock is not muksa because a lock is something usable. So you're good there. However, there's still the problem of this looks a little bit more like you could be building something of permanence than it is with the window. So therefore, you have to have the extra thing is that you did some sort of action to it to actually prepare it for being a lock, some sort of action taken to not what was it, not just to designate it, but to, what was the word we used for that? To alter it in some way. Anyways, so now according to Rabbeinu Tam in that case, that's all you have to do. According to Rashi, you have to also do something else to it, meaning it has to be made not just for a lock, but you have to make it fitting for some other keli. So that and that's all you have to do, but you don't have to tie it to anything. Now, on the other hand, when you have a carpenter's peg or a carpenter's spike, meaning it's something, it's like pieces of wood that they used back then, essentially like nails that you would either have it stuck in the concrete or in the dirt to hold something, or stuck in a hole in the wall to hold something, or whatever it was. So that looks even more like building something of permanence. So therefore, you have to do more than what you have to do to the rod. So now there's two different types of pegs. One has a top that widens, and one has a top that does not widen. So we said the top that widens, you have to have it tied to, well, either it has to be tied to something, but it could be even with a very fine string that's not even capable of supporting the weight of this item, because it's just a siman. It's just like a sign that this has another purpose. It's not meant to stay in the hole that I just put it in. So even if it's just laying on the ground and then you put it in the hole, and then when you don't need it, you take it out. But there's a string that trails from it to the wall or something like this, to the lintel or to the doorpost. So that's enough. However, now we come to a carpenter's peg, which isn't. Oh, is that one? That's a picture you took also?
Yep.
That's a nice one.
I think that's in Chevron.
I want that. Please, I want that. I want it.
Ira wants all the pictures.
I just
send
wanted
them
to
all the
add
pictures.
something. Speaking of locks, do you know why that they can't keep the Jews in prison?
Why?
Oh, no.
Because they eat all the locks.
The locks. It's also it's also because they put regular locks instead of side locks.
I don't get that.
Side
because
locks,
we're learning
to keep
Oh,
the
right,
Jews in side locks.
yeah, I got it.
Okay, so
Nice.
now he comes to the im ein bereisha glustera. What if there is no? It doesn't widen at the top. There's no bulb. I think a glustera like literally means like a bulb or something. But meaning it does not have a wider top. So it even more looks like something that's used specifically for building, right? Whereas the one that has the top, you could say, oh, it looks like it's something that's possibly made for crushing, also, something like this. So the in bereisha, if it doesn't have on its head, Mishnah 17, mishum the kevon the einal anegateiras kli, because this spike does not have the laws of a vessel, right? Of something with other use. So therefore, now it has to be even more recognizable. So this is what it comes down to. It comes down to levels of recognizability. Something that in itself is more recognizable. You need to do less to it to make it recognizable. So the window is less, the rod is a little bit more, you have to do something. The peg with the top, you have to do even a little more something and have the skinny string. And now this peg that it does, because it doesn't have a wide top, so it looks even more like something that would be used for permanent building. So therefore you have to make you have to do something that's a greater what do you call it, the hecker, something that's more easily recognized, that its purpose is for locking the delay near the and it shouldn't look like it's used for something of permanence. Okay, so then we said so now Yudches 18. Hakesher Amitz. So in this case, it's not enough like the peg that had a wide top that you can even have a very thin string that can't support it, but rather you have to have a cord, even though it says a kesher, it calls it a knot, but it's actually referring to it's meaning the string. Amitz, it has to be a strong one. Or beloved hachi aser. And otherwise, if it's not a strong string, it's not just it's better to have a strong string, but without a strong string, it is actually completely not allowed. It is prohibited. Afilu imaneger toloi ba'avid ve'iniger kol ba'aretz. Even if it's hanging in the air and it's not dragging on the ground at all.
Meaning seemingly it has a total hecker that says this is for this usage as a tool and not a construction material, but still it's not enough. It has to be a thicker rope.
Right.
Interesting.
Right. So if the peg is attached to the bar of the door, right, meaning the lintel, with a short cord, such that it is suspended in the air when not in use. So it's true that there's less of an impression of baina when you're using it to lock the door than if it were a long cord that's sitting on the ground. Right? Why? Because if it's hanging in front of the door, it's just more obvious that it's used for a lock. Or if it's hanging on the ground, maybe it's for some, okay, so maybe it's not for that, but maybe it's for some other purpose, whatever it is. But when it's hanging in the air in front of the door, in the spot where you lock it, it's like, you would think it seems very obvious. Nevertheless, a short, weak cord is not enough to remove the presence of baina. But rather, it dafka has to be a strong cord, because we said before, by the peg that has a wide top, it could be even a thin string and even on the ground. So you would think that in this case, if it's a strong cord, if it's not on the ground, if it's not a strong cord, that you would think that it has to be either a strong cord or it can be hanging in the air is fine. No, it has to be a strong cord. And actually, even if it's on the ground, it's still fine. But it has to be a strong cord.
Question. Where did you get that it's talking about a strong cord and not a strong knot? It said before, like this is talking about a stronger
because the whole point of it of the strong, because if you look when he said before by the weak one, he's talking about that it can't support its weight. He's talking about a thin string that can't support its weight.
Yeah, that was the string.
There's that, and don't tell anybody. But it's also that the English Mishna Berura translates it as a cord.
Oh, you have an English Mishna Berura?
Yeah. I have a French one too, but I haven't figured out how to use that one yet.
I didn't realize you had an English one.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at a different English translation, Mishna Berura, and they just write strong knot for this.
Yeah. Okay. Either way, in other words, but I don't think a strong knot is worth anything without a strong cord. So maybe it has to be a strong knot too. But in general,
I could see it. I could see it going either way.
Yeah,
you could have something that's a light string, that's a thin string, that without a knot, it's not gonna hold.
Yeah.
Kind of like, for example, I have a good example.
No, I'll tell you why he's saying it this way.
Hold on. Just first my example. Tooth floss, right? It's very thin. If you don't have a good knot, it's not going to hold anything. It'll slip right out. But the fact is, if you do have a good knot, floss has like a 400-pound tensile strength. It's very strong. Versus on the other side, you ever see those westerns where the guy rocks up with his horse? They don't tie a knot to the thing. He just kind of throws the rope and it wraps around. He doesn't have to tie a thick knot because just the weight of the thickness of this rope, just it wrapping around twice, that's enough that if you pull, it's not going anywhere. It's not moving.
So I get that. I see how it can go that way. However, the reason I think that it means cord, or why they're leaning it to mean cord, is because we're talking as opposed to what? We're talking about this as opposed to chevel dak. There you have to have a chevel dak. Here a chevel dak isn't enough. Rather, you need a kesher amitz. So what do you mean? If we're talking about this, are we talking about the string? Or so there, because the chevel dak was talking, and here we're talking as opposed to chevel dak, as opposed to a thin string. So here it's talking about a thick string. Anyway, and I think both meanings are the same because if you had a strong knot with a string that's going to break, what do you accomplish?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like tooth floss, where it's thin. It's not necessarily weak. It's just thin. Right. So meaning without a strong knot, it's not going to hold.
Right.
Thickness matters in the fact that one holds and one doesn't.
Right. So it could be, but it definitely, I would say it definitely also means that the string itself.
In this case, because we were just talking about the thickness of the string.
I don't see it here, but maybe that's but it could be like you're saying with a knot. Maybe that's why instead of saying chevel, why he uses the word kesher and not here. Maybe he wants to I don't know, stress or encourage that a strong string with an appropriate knot that's going to hold it. I could see that.
Interesting.
So, but nevertheless, a short, weak cord, even though it's hanging in the right place, that looks more like a lock, is not enough to remove the impression of baina. Rather, he has to use a strong cord. This makes it more evident that the peg is being used for a lock, and therefore removes the impression of baina. The Aruch HaShulchan maintains that a weak short cord, such as the peg is hanging in the air, is more effective than a long, strong cord. So anyway, not the Aruch HaShulchan seems to hold not like this. He seems to hold that if a strong cord holding it sitting on the ground is good enough to remove the impression, he holds how much more so a short weak string but it's mamish hanging in front of the thing is even more effective. Okay. Anyways, we'll have to wait till we get to the Alter Rebbe, I guess, to see. Maybe he'll bring that up, and we'll know how we actually go in that way. The Mishna Berura seems to be holding that a short, weak string is not good, but a strong one, even on the ground, is good. Whereas the Aruch HaShulchan seems to hold that a short, weak string, but meaning specifically when it's suspended in the air before the door, would be even better. Fine. Mishna Berura 19. She'ein aser. Let me just see where this goes to. So the last thing we said is once it's tied, in either of these cases, once it's tied, right? It does not have to be hanging, the Mechaber says, right? By the way, even according to Aruch HaShulchan, I mean, I haven't read the actual Aruch HaShulchan on this, but it would but just from the note, it would imply it seems like the Aruch HaShulchan is also holding like this, is that it doesn't have to be hanging, just that the Aruch HaShulchan holds that if it's hanging, then it's not even required to be thick. So Aruch HaShulchan holds either or. It could either be hanging or thick. The Mishna Berura is looking at this as a different way. He's looking at it as that it being suspended doesn't mean anything. It's just the thickness of the rope that we go after. But anyways, even if it's so the Mechaber says it doesn't have to be hanging, but rather if it's just laying on the ground, it's fine. Because the problem is only when it's not tight at all that one could remove it and put it in a totally different area. Then there's a problem. Right? Meaning if you remove it and then put it on a shelf somewhere else, then it's no good. So that it's not forbidden, etc. Meaning besides for when it's not tight at all. He's going all the way to the above when he's talking about if it's a thin string. And on this he's finishing and writing that it's only forbidden when he like removes it, meaning he disconnects it. Meaning when it's not tight at all. And when he takes it out of the place of the hole, that he's using this hole to close the door, he puts it in a corner, meaning he puts it somewhere else. That's not sitting by the door. Then it doesn't look like it's in other words, you have not created an adequate recognition that this is a lock. And then when you're sticking it in and out, it doesn't. Somebody who's walking by and sees you putting it in or taking it out, he could think that you're doing a baina. He has the impression of baina, and it's a problem. Yeah, but one second. What does it mean? I think he's talking about both of them. No, the Mishnah Berura means to clarify that the Shulchan Aruch statement that we require only that the peg not be lying freely on the ground. Oh, he says it goes on the first case and not on the second case. Meaning that the Shulchan Aruch says that it has to be tied, but not laying on the ground without it being tied at all, cannot be referring to the final case where the peg that does not have a knobbed end and is tied to the bar of the door. In that case, it has to be tied with a strong cord. And if it's tied with a weak cord, it's forbidden. Oh, so obviously it can't be talking about. So why would he be telling you on that case that it can't just be lying on the ground? We already know it has to be tied with a strong cord. And if it's tied with a weak cord, it's forbidden, even if it's not lying freely on the ground. Which is funny because I wonder how the Aruch HaShulchan in that case would translate this. Shulchan Aruch must be referring to the earlier case where the peg is knobbed, or the peg is not knobbed but it's tied to the door itself. Like you said before, that's also good enough, right? If it's actually tied to the door. In either case, the Shulchan Aruch rules that a weak cord is sufficient. Shulchan Aruch now adds that even a weak long cord is acceptable. It's we only require that it be tied in some fashion rather than laying on the ground. Yeah.
So
And it's on.
Okay. I think that's everything for them. Let me see in 20. What is? Yeah. So then I think the next part
is base.
Is base. Siman base. Okay. Who's
all right.
Doing Siman base?
Base. So the rule of a carpenter's peg, any carpenter's peg that we mention, applies only when the threshold is high. It's high enough that when you stick it b'miftan into the hole, It doesn't penetrate the earth. But if the threshold has been opened, if it's so low, basically, that when you put the carbon peg in the hole, it digs into the earth beneath it. Again, threshold, we're talking about the thing on the floor. Have a binyan v'asur lino boy. So then that would be building, and you're not allowed to lock it on Shabbos. So like I mentioned, the last year we had, like my in-law, for those who have been to Chabad on campus in Wallingford, my in-law's house, but you can imagine also many other houses. If you ever seen one of those like double doors, right? Usually the second door has those little latches that go up, and then the one that goes down into the ground. So what we're saying is if the one in the ground has, there's a hole dug there already, pre-dug, and when you put the latch down, it only, goes so far, and it doesn't push into the dirt beneath it any more than was already pre-dug, then it's fine. But if every time you drop that latch or you push it down, it digs into the dirt, that's a problem, because that digging makes it like this is a form of binyan. And very nice picture and hat, Ira, must say.
When you say it's a form of what? Binyan?
Binyan, construction. Construction, okay. Which is not allowed on Shabbos. Yeah, right. Construction. Binyan.
Wow.
Binyan adayad, sheyabana beis hamikdash.
Right, that's the thing with binyan. That's how you know that a binyan, if it's going to be a binyan, it has to be a binyan adayad. It has to be a permanent structure.
Yeah, just by pushing it down to lock the door on Shabbos. Wow. Who locks the doors on Shabbos?
What? It's not the first.
By the way, Leib, it's also in most shuls, right? A lot of shuls, not on most shuls, but a lot of shuls that were built in the modern timey days, right? In the modern era, they also have the double doors, and then they have those on the inside edge of the door. They have like those latches that catch the top and the catch the top and the bottom. Yeah. Same, yeah.
And by the way, I'd like to personally thank Leib Markel for giving me.
Oh, really?
This cap. It was a pleasant surprise. Pleasant surprise with a whole yarmulke or yachi yarmulke that he gave me as a gift, and the pen. Thank you, Leib Markel.
All right, Yeshikach Leib Markel.
Shout out to Leib.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by Leib Markel. And this chusa refuah shalema for Yosef Yitzchak ben Simchasia and Baruch Mendel ben Bela. Anybody who wants to sponsor this show, click on the big donation link
that's on your screens now.
Yeah, that's right. Wait, here.
Oh man!
Click here. Go to this. Up our editing team forgot to put the link in. What are you going to do?
I'll jump on that.
By the way, a public service notice is that if you remember the Canadian wildfire things that were in New York a while ago, they're in Pittsburgh today. You can actually smell it outside. Therefore, I am going to play it on the safe side, and I will not be involved in any strenuous outdoor activity today.
Yeah, they're putting out a warning that people who have breathing issues.
I mean, after all, everybody knows how I'm accustomed to strenuous outdoor
you're
activities.
Always you're marathon running and you're climbing of mountains every day. It's just mental.
Okay,
take a break for a day.
Mishna Berura 20. Right? Yeah, 20.
Kol neger. Yeah.
Kol neger, any peg, right? Any carpenter's peg. Hainu afilu yesh bereishe glustra v'hu kosher. Ein ve'er halacha. That even if meaning we're not just talking about our last case of the peg that is not wide, but even the kind of peg that has a wider top we're talking about. See Be'er Halacha. Let me just look at the Be'er Halacha. The comments of Mishnah Berura follow Beis Yosef. According to the Be'er Hagara, who asserts that according to Rashi and the Tur, there is no difference between a peg that happens to have a knobbed end and a peg whose knob was purposely fashioned.
What do you call a woman with one leg?
Eileen, I think it was, right? That's an old joke.
Or peg.
Oh, peg. Good.
Peg is a good
See
one.
that? What is it? Okay, there we go.
Or Eileen, they're sisters.
No, but the peg it works with this.
That's why I said it.
Yeah, no, now I got it. It took me a second. I was wondering like why, like what made you think of that joke like just now? Once you said the answer, I got it.
I got my own sideshow going.
Okay, so according to Rashi in the Tur, there's no difference. The peg that we said before is that if a peg has a widened head, there's no difference if that's the way the peg is. Like, let's say it's made that way so that you can use like a bigger hammer, like a heavier, you know what I'm saying, like some kind of a bigger hammer, so it has more of a head to catch it on, or if you purposely fashioned it that way, it is possible that the Rif would even permit inserting a peg that happens to have a knobbed end into a worn down threshold. Why? Okay, according to the Gira, it is possible that the Rif would even permit inserting a peg that happens to have a knobbed end into a worn down threshold. This is the big Gira might hold that the Rif too makes no distinction between these two types of pegs and permits both of them. I don't see how that is connected though to well, let me look at the B and C. Okay, so he said any peg okay, so first of all, apparently a goes to where? Goes to the actual mechaber. I think goes to the mechaber. That apparently this is because a hole in the ground is typically created for the sake of an enduring improvement to a structure, rather for something that will be added and removed to a regular basis. So meaning a hole in the ground, I guess in those days, was not necessarily the usual way of making a lock, which is one of the reasons that you have to make such a why the peg in the ground, as opposed to like we said with the rod before, we didn't require such a thing. So part of it is not just the peg itself; it's the nature of the hole in the ground. That a hole in the ground is usually is more commonly associated with a permanent addition. Seemingly, creating a hole in the ground should pose a more serious problem of the impression of baina. It should, so not only is it an impression of baina, but it should be forbidden as a tolda, as like how do you call it tolda? Like it's like an extension. There's, in other words, there's the main malachis, there's the main labors like building, and then there's certain things that are so similar that they're an extension of that malacha. But remember that a tolda is also a Torah prohibition. So it should be prohibited as a tolda. This difficulty is somewhat resolved if we view this as adding to the hole which already exists in the threshold, rather than creating an entirely new hole. The permissibility of adding to a hole where one has no need for the hole and no intention to form it. So this is the subject of a major dispute. Our difficulty remains, however, according to the stringent view on that issue, okay, anyway, so that's just, he's talking about that the hole in the ground, it would seem could be is itself not so simple of an issue. Okay, so he said that even if it has a knobbed end and it is tied to the door, we're still talking about that. If the hole it gets too low, it's a problem. Sharatzian, Mishna Berura's statement that a peg with a knobbed end may not be inserted in the worn down threshold is based on Beis Yosef. The Gemara Eidavin asks whether one may use a peg for which you handle the fashion that you handle the fashion. You didn't handle a fashion. You fashioned the handle. And concludes that it is permitted. Beis Yosef understands that the Gemara's question refers to inserting a peg in a worn down threshold that is discussed in this passage. So he explains there that there's a difference between a peg that happens to have a knobbed end, which may not be used, and a peg for which a handle was purposely fashioned, which may be used. right? Like we saw with the with also with the rod, right? What we saw with the rod, that it can't just be something that happens to have something. You have to do something to it, right? You have to have fashioned something of it. So here the same thing is the Beis Yosef holds that there is that when we say it has a knobbed end, that there is a difference. Now in the above case, we didn't mention any difference, but here where there's a worn down hole, the Beis Yosef would understand it as the peg that in a being that the worn down hole is more of a problem. So the peg that happens to have a widened end you cannot use, but one that you purposely fashioned the end, right? And not only that, why would you fashion the end? It's because you don't want the whole peg to fall into the hole. If the hole is deeper than the peg and you have nothing to block it from falling in, how are you taking it out after? And not only that, how's it locking your door? So you stick the peg in there, it falls in. What do you do? So the Mishnah Berura's assertion here that even a peg that is tied may not be used with the worn down threshold also comes from the Beis Yosef. Since, like mentioned above, he states that the Gemara's question as to forming a handle would permit the use of a peg refers to where the threshold is worn down, which is the prior discussion in that Gemara. And the Gemara states explicitly that in that case where there's no handle, even if the peg is not removed when not in use, but rather is tied to the door, it's still forbidden. So in the case where the hole is deep, it's not going to make a difference. Even the tying is not going to make a difference. Rather, the only thing that'll make a difference in that case is if you fashion the handle for it. Meaning, even we're talking about whether it's a peg that's not wide at the end and has a string, right? Even a thick string, or a peg that's widened by itself is a problem in this hole, but a peg that has a widened thing that you made, that will be not as bad. And that's what the Be'er Halacha was talking about in terms of Rashi and the Torah. Is there a difference between because some maintain that there is no difference between if you fashioned it or you did fashion it. The Beis Yosef obviously seems to hold that there is a difference. Mishnah Berura 21. Avol im. Let me just go see where was the Avol im. Oh, but what happens if the hole got worn down such that the hole that is taller than the peg itself? The im also la b'siyad. If he made a handle for it, who can make similar to the widening or the bulb on the that we were talking about before. And similar to the I guess a pestle, right?
Right, or dowel or whatever.
Yeah, I have to look it up. I'm pretty sure the T is silent. I think it's a pestle.
Oh yeah, it's pestle. We looked it up last time.
Oh, we did good.
It's pestle.
Now you know why my English is so bad. Even when we look it up, I still can't remember.
What's a pestle?
A pestle. It's like it's the thing that you crush spices in a mortar, right? There's a mortar.
Oh yeah. I know.
By the way, a mortar. I think that's why the military implement called a mortar.
Yeah.
If you look at the early military implements of that nature, there were these. Remember, metal was not as strong back then, so they had to be very thick, and it basically looked almost like the thing that you crush spices in, but very large.
Oh well, you said
and
pestle.
It was made for lobbing shells over walls.
I thought when you said pestle was a Hebrew word I never heard of, so I'm thinking maybe he means pencil.
Right, he was right. He was thinking you means labels pestle or the Baruch's pestle, like whose pestle is also a name. Pei Ayin Samach Yud Lamed is a name for girls also.
But I was thinking pencil with a Z, pencil.
Well, pencil that's Yiddish, but we're not going into that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a clean show, Ira.
Right.
Anyway, so if one made a handle above, which is similar to the knob mentioned above, which makes it look like a pestle that you crush spices with. So then what's the difference? Before we were talking about that the knob it happened to already, meaning it was there automatically, which meaning it was already there. It happens to be there, not that you made it. And here we're talking about that you made it yourself with your hands, meaning you actually purposely fashioned it that way. Muchach de klihu, that it's obvious that it's a vessel, and it no longer resembles building. Why? The ain derech l'shakei kli bevinyan levat leisham. That it's not the usual thing to take a usable vessel, right? To take a tool and to sink it into the ground and leave it there. It's not usual to use that in that way for building. Rather, if it's a vessel, if you're putting it there, you're going to take it back later because you're going to need it. V'kevan she'asa b'y ma'aseh, and since he did an action, la'saisei kli, to make it into a vessel, right? Meaning you fashioned it into a lock. Shari, it's permitted. Vafilu, oh, interesting. Vafilu ain't kosher. So this is he's giving us new information on the last seif. The last seif, when we were talking about the carpenter's peg with a bulbous head, is specifically only talking about when it happened to be that way. It was already like that, not that you fashioned it into that. Because if you fashion it into it, then it's the same like the lock that you fashioned. It's a lock. In other words, it's not a peg anymore. It's a lock, and a lock is mutter. A lock is no problem. Here we're talking about you're using something else as a lock, but when you fashion that handle on it to be used as a lock, you now turned it into a lock, and it doesn't even have to be tied. So the last sif that we were talking about, the one that has to be tied, is talking about you're using an existing carpenter's peg that has a wide head and therefore more so resembles. However, when you did it yourself, you do not even have to tie it. Kain Kasa Beisesif, this is what the Beisesif writes, Vehevi Ira Mirif, and he brings a proof from the Rif. The Gira Kasa Biviyure, and the Gira writes in his explanation, the Das Rashi Vatur, that according to the Rashi and Tur, Loi Matzinu Heter.
So you can't tie anything on Shabbos, right?
Well, this is all talking about you tied it there before Shabbos.
Well, this is where my product comes in. It's called
Shabbos tie.
These are Shabbos shoelaces. Okay, this is my company, and these are the instructions, and I'll be glad to give a free pair away to the two rabbis. By the way, as Kenai Nahara, our two rabbis are very careful about having the maximum joy of Shabbos. And therefore tying shoelaces is not necessarily the two rabbis' favorite, at least for me. I can tell it's not a mistake that I tend to wear loafers more so than Oxfords.
Yeah.
Well, you won't have to.
Most of mine are slip-ons.
Do you have them in black?
Yes, sir. I have them black, white.
Now
pink,
we're talking.
Black, white, pink.
See, Mendel can finally wear Oxfords again on Shabbos.
Hot lime. I got the hot colors.
The hot lime will keep for special occasions, but
so remind me, and we'll talk about this product off the air because we don't have time now.
Absolutely.
But
by the way, those are very, very good. You can put your shoes in them. And
anyone that's watching this, by the way, if they want to and they want to make a purchase, they can get in touch with me on Facebook or call me on my cell. 412-600-0919. 9559. Again, 412-600-9559. And 10% of the proceeds will go to this broadcast.
See that? Now we're talking.
Yeah, that's an executive producer.
Hey, it's about time you got us some advertisers.
10%
You are the executive producer after all.
Will go to this broadcast. Period.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Awesome.
So now back. How do they say it? Like Johnny Carson? What did he say when you come back from the commercial?
We're back.
And we're back. Okay, so we're talking about, so if you fashioned it yourself, right, according to the Rif anyways, it would seem that it's not a problem. The Berura writes, though, that according to Rashi and the Tur, right, the Berura being the Vilna Gaon, by the way, that according to Rashi and the Tur, we find there is no heter by nikmaz. Nikmaz means by worn down, which is what we're talking about in this seif now, right? What happens if the hole got worn down? So the Bes Yosef holds that if you made it into a handle, you fashioned it into a handle, then the worn down hole is not a problem. If you did not fashion a handle, meaning either it has a bulb, that's how this particular carpenter spike is, or alternatively, if it doesn't have any widening at the top, even if it's tied, even if it's not tied, it's no good in this hole that's deeper than the peg. However, if it's a peg that you fashioned into a handle, then it's a lock, and it doesn't even need to be tied. And even in this hole, it's fine. However, according to Rashi and the Tur, they don't hold that there's a distinction here. What's nikmaz? He says the hainu nifchasa aspuka. What nikmaz meaning, like we're talking about here, that the hole got deeper. Afilu al yidei asiyas beis yad, even if you fashion a handle, it is still not good enough. What is okay? E, F, and G. So to explain, a peg that happens to have a knob resembles a kli, and therefore it has the status of a kli to some extent. Right? We said that, in other words, the builder's peg. The builder's peg is not really a kli, right? It's not really made for crushing. For crushing spices. It's just that it resembles a kli, and therefore it helps to some extent to eliminate the perception of baina. But this status is not sufficiently established to allow inserting it into a hole if it actually penetrates the ground and forms a new hole. One second. So it looks like we're not talking about if the hold on a second. We're not talking about the hole has been worn down. We're talking about something different here. This whole thing, we're not talking about the hole has gone deeper. We're talking about the other way around. The threshold has gone deeper, and the hole has gotten shorter. So the problem isn't that it goes into the hole all the way. The problem is that when you're putting the peg in, you're penetrating the ground and making a new hole. So now you have a bigger problem. Why? Because the kli, right? For example, this carpenter's peg that you're driving into the ground, even though we said it looks less like a carpenter's kli, and that's why, depending on the string and all these things, right? But here the fact is you're driving a carpenter's peg into the ground. So that's why he was saying it's a tulda. It's you're possibly doing an actual malacha here, or the extension of a malacha. Right? Whereas when you have a lock and you're making a hole with the lock, it's a lock, it's a kli, it's not a carpenter's peg, so you're not doing by now. Yeah, so that's what he's talking about. So this status that the peg that happens to look like a vessel, but it's not like a pestle, right? But it's not really one. It's not enough of a status to allow inserting it into a hole if it actually penetrates the ground and forms a new hole. If, however, one purposely fashions the knob, then it is abundantly clear that the peg is an independent kli that will not be left in the place, and it may therefore be used even if it penetrates the ground, meaning even if it's bigger than the hole and you end up going into the ground a little bit. The Rif, the Beis Yosef, who brings proof, we said that the Beis Yosef uses proof from the Rif. That if somebody made it a kli, if you fashioned it, right, that it's permitted even when it's not tied to the door. That the Rif and Eruvin, in the Gemara Eruvin, implies that the Gemara's question as to whether one may use a peg for which a handle was purposely fashioned, and its conclusion that it's permitted, relates to the case of nikmas, a worn down threshold. So the Rif is ties that Gemara of when you made a handle to here. So that's the proof the Beis Yosef uses, that the Rif holds that by nikmas, right, by where the threshold has worn down, and now the hole is not so deep, that the Rif holds that it's that if you fashion the handle, it's okay. Being that the Rif takes the Gemara that's talking about fashioning a handle and says that it's talking about by this case of nikmas.
When I put nikmas into Google Translate, by the way, it has it as bend. I don't know. I guess we're talking though that in this case we're talking that it scrapes out.
That's modern Hebrew.
Yeah, I know.
Or it could mean bend, but
are we talking about the pestle or whatever the thing bends, or no? We're talking about
the threshold, the floor,
right?
The floor so under whether the floor is like by us we have a threshold which is a piece, but a threshold really just means the space under the door, meaning that's a place that people use often, right? From people walking through the door and stuff, it's sunk.
It's the bottom plate of the door.
It's the floor, the floor under the door. So since the floor has gone down, automatically what happens to the hole? It becomes more shallow. Because when the hole was originally made, it was made to a floor that was this high. Now the floor has dropped this high, so the hole automatically dropped as much. So now the peg that originally was the right size to go in, right, that you had going in, is now going to penetrate through the floor because the floor is a little bit lower.
What does that have to do?
So meaning it's gonna dig out a little bit more from the bottom of that hole.
All right.
Unless it's has a metal sleeve in the hole.
Well, in this case, we're talking about obviously it doesn't have a metal sleeve because otherwise how would you get the? Then there would be no problem if there's a metal sleeve on it.
That's right.
First of all, if there's a metal sleeve, it would take a lot more to get it to wear down anyways. But let's use a hybrid scenario where you have there's a metal piece under the ground. So still you wouldn't have that problem because it's not going to penetrate beyond that. Right, but in this case we're talking about where it's like whatever it is, it's rock, clay, it's ground. Now, what was we spoke about the Gerah, right? The Vilna Gaon that he says that according to Rashi in the Tur, we find no license in the case of nikmas, even when there's a handle on the peg. So meaning that that according to Rashi in the Tur, they're not understanding it the way the Beis Yosef is understanding it. That by that when it's worn down, there's a difference between a handle and that you fashioned or not. So according to Bir Hagara, his interpretation of Rashi in the Torah, the Gemara's question with regard to a peg for which a handle was fashioned has nothing to do with a worn down threshold, right? So, which, like we said before, we said that the Beis Yosef, why does he say that you can use that it's okay to use it when it has a handle? Because in that Gemara, that's talking about fashioning a handle, the Rif says that it's talking about nikmas, but the Rashi and Torah don't hold that Gemara is talking about nikmas. They hold it's talking about a different scenario. So since they hold that Gemara has nothing to do with the worn down threshold, so according to Rashi and the Torah, there's no there's no source for the fact that fashioning a handle makes it permissible in the case of worn down, right? No peg may be, so according to them, no peg may be used to that. Rather, they hold that Gemara refers to a peg which is inserted into an already made hole but is not tied. So according to the Rashi and Torah, it's talking about whether it's tied or not, and that's the issue. And according to the Rif, the issue is whether it's nikmaz or not whether it's worn down or not. The Gemara concludes that it is permitted. So, and according to Rashi and the Torah, it doesn't make a difference if it happens to have a knob or it's purposely fashioned. Meaning they entirely reject the distinction made by the Beis Yosef, that there's any difference between if you made the handle or not. There is, however, somewhat of a difference in Rashi and the Torah. According to Rashi, one may use a knobbed peg even if it's not tied at all. So Rashi holds that if it's a widened peg, if it has a glustera, right, like you said before, you're allowed to use it without tying it, according to Rashi. Obviously, we see in Shulchan Aruch, we don't hold that way. That you have to tie it, just that you have to tie it with a thinner string, according to Beis Yosef. Whereas the Torah, it need not be tied to the door, but it has to be tied to the bar of the door. But in either case, but both Rashi and the Torah, according to the Gira, make no difference whether or not by a knob, if you fashion the handle or not. Whereas the Beis Yosef, there's two distinctions. One of them is if you handle the fashion, it need not be tied at all, which that part goes like Rashi. But and furthermore, in this case of a worn down step, if you fashion the handle, it's okay to use. Whereas according to Rashi and the Torah, at least the way that they're understood by the Gira, you may not use any peg in such a hole. Okay, it's 2022. Where does 22 go on? Nifrasa haspuka. The threshold was worn down. Haskupa. I'm saying it backwards. It's nifrasa askupa. If he made like a space in the ground, right? He made a hole, like an empty area in the ground. That's going to be a place where the head of the peg does not add, right? Meaning if the hole is made such that you already see, you measure the peg and you make your hole so that the peg will that the hole is deeper than the peg. So therefore you don't have to worry about the peg going further, digging into the ground anymore.
We'll make it deeper.
Right. The ain't name about it. Ain't isur, so then there's no problem. And based on this, we can understand the practice, what they do in most of the houses, that they make holes in the walls on each side by the door, meaning in the doorposts. In the doorposts, or back then they didn't necessarily have doorposts the same like we do. It could just be there's the wall and then there's a door in there. But whatever.
No, but what about like a deadbolt, or like how our doors work? It goes into the wall.
Yeah, exactly. So even now we have that. But I'm saying by doorpost, lav dafka, if we're picturing like a door, like a thing with wooden trim, like we have it. The doorpost could also just mean the wall that's on the side of it. But
I'm just saying, stop. This is just, you're allowed to make a hole in the wall for it to go into the wall. And
then so you put so there's a hole on either side, and then they run a bar through from one end to the other. We don't say that it's like building. The mali shenichnas b'chema ilamat ba'aretz, because what's the difference if I put it in the walls or in the ground, right? And so we just said is this whole problem that we're talking in this seif is if your hole is shorter than your peg, and now you're gonna dig in the ground. If you made sure that the hole is deeper, you don't have a problem. And similarly, by this bar that goes from end to end, you also have no problem. El mishum shenasa loy shenasa mitchila l'chol nikav b'chema. El mishum shenasa mitchila l'kach nikav b'chema ein kain al kain enisur. Because you already have the hole, your holes in the wall are already there before Shabbos. Therefore, there is no prohibition. And furthermore, it seems the kevan sha'is in tabas shel bazel be'emtza abriach. Right. Furthermore, it seems that since a ring of iron is made in the middle of the bar, I'm assuming he means the bar the bar that's used to go through the holes here. So, like, if you can imagine, right? Like, well, I remember we actually had a bar like this. We had plywood doors that were made in a warehouse that I used to work in a long time ago, and in the wood, right, in the 2x4s, there was holes that were driven through all 4 2x4s, and it was also a hole. The holes were also in the 2x4s that were on the frame. It was like these big doors that swung out so you can bring the forklifts in, and then there was a bar that went all the way through. And it crossed both double doors, and it crossed also the frames on the sides of the doors. Right? It's similar to like this idea. Now, in that case, they bent the end of the handle of the bar on one end, so that's how you could use that to like slap it out. In this case, I guess Pete was more. That was just whatever. That was what the that was what the worker mans did that happened to make this one. But back then, where this is more common practice, it would seem they would have like almost like a handle, like that you could use to rather than grabbing the pole itself, there's a handle, and then you just slap it by the handle that's on it, and then you pull it out of that hole, then you pull it out of that hole, and then you can carry it with the handle and lean it against the wall, whatever you wanted to do. So since there is an iron handle in the middle of it, and you hold on to that when you are when you pull the thing with that, so that's the same thing as having fashioned the handle, the mutter, which is permitted. Afilu b'einei kosher, even if it's not tied. Afilu b'nivchaso haspuka, even if the threshold is worn down, which this is the this is the source of this is the Taz. Taz Sharachinim. V'nira da'afilu l'das ha'gerah shemachmir le'el b'osalei beis yad l'das ha'shvatur, and it would seem that even according to the gerah, who is stringent right? With regard to, remember that he holds like Rashi in the Tur that a handle that if it has a handle or no handle, meaning if you shape the handle or it has no handle or whatever, no peg is allowed in the hole in the ground that got shorter. That even according to them, yesh lahakil bezeh mipnei tziruf tamarishin shalataz. That we can be lenient because of the first reason of the taz. Meaning now he's talking about the bar inserted into the wall. So he's saying that according to the Beis Yosef, so for sure you can say if the peg in the ground and we set a handle that's formed yourself, that you formed, there's no problem, right? So for sure, but he says even according to the Gerah, when it comes to the bar and inserted in the holes in the wall, you can be more makel, even according to the Gerah. He's going to explain this better in a second. Let me just go. We're in number 22. So here we did that one. Okay, it would seem we're talking about that there's no prohibition because the holes in the walls were initially made for this reason. That's the reason there's no prohibition, because you originally made the holes in the wall for this reason. It would seem, however, that even if we follow this rationale, the bar would still have to fulfill the requirement of the rod discussed before, which is also inserted into the wall. Which one was that? Oh, here it'll say, thus the bar would have to be adapted as a kaliba from before Shabbos. So we're assuming that this bar, it would still have to fulfill the requirement is that from before Shabbos you adapted it, right? Because you remember in the beginning of the first seif, we spoke about the rod, and that the rod, it's not enough that he just designated, but rather he has to also adapt it. So the same thing with this rod, it would seem that would also have to have you would still have to do that all the same. Either as an independent kli, right? Meaning either as, like according to Rashi, that you have to make it into according to Rashi, you would have to make it into a different vessel, not besides for just a lock. And according to Rabbi Tam, you would have to make it into, as long as you designate this bar that's going into the doors, as long as it's been designated for as a lock, it's fine. According to Rashi, you would need an additional use, like you're also making it to be for olives or something like that, right? Like to knock olives off the tree. So the Taz offers two reasons for permitting inserting the bar into the holes in the wall. One, the first reason, this is important to understand in order to understand why the Mishna Berura is holding that according to the Gerah, the bar in the wall would be lenient as opposed to the peg in the ground. So the first reason is that the bar, unlike a peg in a worn down threshold, does not create a new hole when it's inserted. And two, it's fastened with a ring, which is the equivalent to a handle. So just as a peg with a handle may be inserted into a worn down threshold, even though it does create a new hole, so for sure you can insert it into a wall where it does not create a new hole. Right? So the Mishnah Berura now in terms of the Gerah, now understanding that Gerah, right? The Vilna Gaon, but wait a second, the Vilna Gaon holds there's no difference if it has a handle on it or not. But we still have the first reason that the Taz brings, which is that the bar is not creating a new hole. That the whole time you have a problem is when you put the peg in the ground, you're creating a new hole. In this case, where it's going to the wall, I guess it goes into like a cholol, into like a space in the wall. So therefore, you're not digging out any extra. The Mishna Berura taught that the Vilna Gaon maintains that according to Rashi in the Torah, one may not insert a peg into a hole in the worn-down threshold, even if a handle was fashioned for the peg. Thus, the second rationale utilized by the Taz, which this will help us understand the Taz when we get there, to permit inserting the bar in the wall in a fashion according to those Rishonim, meaning that because it has a handle. So that rationale he doesn't hold by. But we can still use the first one. Mishnah Berura asserts that nonetheless there's sufficient basis to permit inserting the bar in the wall, even according to the Vilna Gaon. Why? Since one, the Vilna Gaon concedes that other Rishonim, such as the Rif, do permit inserting a peg in a handle. In other words, the Vilna Gaon brings this way of understanding the Rashi and the Torah, and maybe even leans towards it, but he still holds that, like the Rif and other Rishonim, there's a valid position there, even if he doesn't hold by that position, even if he doesn't paskin by it. And two, the first rationale of the Taz, that the bar does not create new holes in the wall, still stands. So you still have that rationale, is that a bar is less stringent than a peg. It is important to note that the Taz refers to a bar that is placed into a previously made hole to lock the door and removed from the wall when one opens the door. Contemporary sliding bolts, which are slid into a hole in the wall or bracket attached to it, are certainly permitted according to all views, since they are attached to the door. In other words, all of this that we're talking about here doesn't refer to our locks, right? So, like, let's go back to the Chabad house peg, right? The double door with the pegs up and down. It's similar to this, only it's not similar because that's actually a hard, what do you call it? Like hardwired. It's permanently connected to the door. Where here, our whole issue is, what if you're using something that comes out and goes back in? And thus they bear no resemblance to Baina at all. One may use an L-shaped screw that is inserted into a door frame or the lintel to lock the door, since it was made to be used in this fashion, as long as a new hole is not certain to be formed, meaning as long as it's not a psik reisha. And Aruch Shabbos says there's a dispute whether you can remove and replace a spring-loaded toilet roll holder on Shabbos. Rabbi Yosef Shalom Elyashiv forbids it. You're not allowed to, the spring-loaded toilet holders? According to Rabbi Elyashiv, you're not allowed to move it. And Aruch Shabbos explains his view by way of distinction between the bar discussed here, which is intermittently attached to the building when the door is barred and removed when one wishes to open the door, and the spring-loaded holder, which is essentially part of the building. And you remove it for a short time necessary to place the roll, and then you quickly put it back in place. Shmir Shabbos Kehilchasa, which that's Shlomo Arbach, no? Yeah, and Rabbi Karelitz, they permit removing and replacing a holder since it's meant to come out. It's made to come out on a fairly regular basis. Anyways, and we're up to if three. And just quickly, as far as, don't think that just because there are those that permit it that you're allowed to do it. Ask your local Rav, are you allowed to remove the spring-loaded? First of all, we don't. By me, it's a problem anyway, because our toilet paper is essentially muktzah in a way, because we don't. It's not cut. We have no use for it really, unless you use the whole roll, I guess. Then it's not muktzah. But why would you need to replace a roll of toilet paper when you can't use toilet paper? But in either case, that spring-loaded thing, according to Rabbi Elyashiv, is part of the building. You're removing it, and now you're adding to the building. According to Shlomo Arbach and Karelitz, it's not. It's made to cut. It's just like a window, like we said before. It's made to come in and out. Anyways, are you allowed to remove it? First of all, we don't really use toilet paper on Yom Tov. We use a tissue and zaygebenched, and we will see. Now we're on to the next shir, which is both the prior shir and the coming up shir. Are in the honor of the merit of Refuah Shleimer for Yitzchak ben Simchasya and Baruch Mendel ben